Chapter 21 of The Blue Star. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Angelique G. Campbell, August 2018. The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT. Midwinter. The Return. "Make up this account for closing," said the protagonists, handing Rodvard a dossier which bore the endorsement: "Approved to expel the subject from the Mianase for contumacious refusal to accept any choice. Tradit 1." Rodvard dragged a weary feet to the bench, for his night had been sleepless, with this matter of Lalette reaching a crisis. All week she had striven to pretend in the presence of others that nothing was changed, but would neither bring his breakfast nor allow him any opportunity to speak with her alone in the evening. A crisis. The sleepless night began when he had refused to walk with her and Vienna under planes still clutching through their last leaves, then felt unhappy over the look of a friend betrayed that came into her eyes. A crisis. For that look was a trap as grim as the one the witch had set for him. He did not really want the dark-browed Lalette, he told himself. Overall, at the price of permanent union she set upon her body, it was, enough merely to talk with her and be gay companions as he was with the other sisters. Only the moments when a contact of lips or body sent a devouring flame along his veins were different. Yet there was now upon him a compulsion to find the next move in the game and carry it through, as though he were involved in a complex dance and dared not miss a pace. What is this, then? He asked himself. Am I a mechanician's instrument, or so weak I am not my own master? Is it that I owe her a duty, and by what sanction am I held thereto? The priest at the academy might have had an answer for that. He would have said that the sanction was of God, who sends us all peace, so that even those misguided men who say there is no God must make an inner peace through a claim to be true to some image of the ideal which they call themselves, so that God is not bought, but enters in them unawares, and they only make their own path harder by reaching him through devious ways instead of simple. He could remember the argument accurately, and how its force had once struck him. Thus the priest, then. But if the sanction was of God, did God, Rodvard now asked himself, urge him to this pursuit of Lalette? No matter what. He knew that when he reached the Julardis' house that night, the intricate pavane would continue, and he, a part of it as before. Leave, then. No, not in this land where he was a public prisoner, required still to report on every 10th day, an irritating routine. For that matter, leave for where? Not Dosala, with the prosecution hanging over his head, not any other place. Dance out the dance. The protagonists' step aroused him from reverie. He opened the dossier with a feeling of vertigo, perceived that it was from the Couvertine's Loloa, on the account of the Mianasean, Lalette Asterhax. Without a knock the door opened, Lalette slipped in and stood with her back to it, looking down. Rodvard began hastily to make good his jacket laces. "It was my fault," she said in a thin voice, then hurriedly, "what I did was contrary to the law of love. Do you want me to bring your breakfast in the morning?" Her eyes were veiled, but one could guess what lay behind them. And one must tread the right measure. "Yes. You are still angry with me." He ran across the room and seized her in his arms, so she let her dark head slide down against his neck. "What can I say?" kissing her ear and the side of her neck, yet at the same time feeling a revulsion, almost physical. And all the time the thought of that other was at the back of his mind, not coming forward because he dared not let it. A sudden tenseness was in her grip. She flung her head back and looked at him out of eyes that spoke mistrust. "Rodvard, what is wrong?" "Nothing. We must hurry and go into supper before someone misses us." A rivulet of perspiration traced down his spine. She kissed him long and hard, with the doubt still there, and was gone. Afterward, it was the tall Vienna who went to walk with them. Lassie took his hand, all gay, but casting glances that seemed to show an unasked question in her mind, so that Rodvard wondered whether she might not have some part of the Blue Star's gift. He said to Fiona, "Tell me something. If you were in the Mianase, how could I come to see you?" Her face fell sober. "I am not a Mianasean yet, but if I were, it would not be easy unless you became at least a learner. The Mianases have no contact with the outer world save those they make themselves." "A strange rule," he said, not daring to push the matter further, lest he betray his thoughts. Now Lassie spoke, trying to justify the regimen under which the girls lived, but Fiona, being so near to the sisterhood, was doubtful, and Rodvard heard both of them with only part of his mind, considering what he must do. There was no question but he must do it. Ah, no. The expelled of Mianase he knew well were shut up in gloomy prisons for instruction. It might be for years. The Couvertine Loloa was— "Do you not think so, Rodvard?" said Lassie's voice. "I am sorry, I was thinking of a thing." All her attention and affection suddenly rushed at him. She pressed his hand hard. "I was only saying," and in spite of that warm grip, his mind went off again under the babble. The Blue Star would perhaps let him make his way in, if the light were good, and they reached the door. Lassie squeezed his hand again possessively. He knew she would have sought a corner and kissed him, but he managed to avoid that, with a certain shame picking at him. Inside he went rapidly upstairs, then stood tingling in his own room as outer steps went to and fro. His mind toiled at details. The lock of the street door was a heavy one, usually turning with a grating sound. He must have a story ready to tell if someone woke and asked him questions. But before he could work at a tale, the small sounds died to a single series of pat, 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 and he had a moment of dreadful fear and excitement mingled that it might be Lassie coming to him that night. This was his turning point in life, he thought, and the choice was being made from outside himself. The steps went past. Rodvard released his breath, sat down, and trying to use up the time until all should be asleep, began to repeat to himself Arundostel's ballad of the archer and the bear. But at the third stanza a rhyme somehow eluded him, and he nearly went mad trying to recall it, while at the same time the other half of his mind went round the problem of Lassie, Lalette, Lalette, Lassie, without once making a real effort toward the plan he must have. Then he tried to solve how the line of duty might be considered to lie, according to one or another system of philosophy, but all this yielded was the unsatisfactory conclusion that he did not know where duty or even true desire lay, only what he was going to do. Now he began to count boards in the floor, as he had counted the cask staves of the ship, merely to pass time, and time passed. He cracked the door ajar, heard someone snore, and reached the odd thought that even the loveliest of girls sometimes snore. Tip-tap, and he went down the hall to the stairs. A board creaked there. He paused. The key grated even more harshly than he had anticipated, and again he stood breathless a minute, then was in the street. A sense of freedom swelled through him as he looked up at the winter stars. This must be the right line, the glorious line. Hurrah! Even though the adventure failed. A slight street, down which advanced in the near distance a cloaked couple, picking their way along with a light boy before. The checkered gleams from the window of his lantern caught the tree trunks and half reflected from the dull surfaces seemed like weary fireflies. A one-horse caleche went past, its form dimly outlined against the darker shadows beneath the branches. "Step on, Rodvard. The way is here." He stumbled in the dark over the edge of a cobble, turned a corner and another, wondering how the glass stood, and reached the Couvertine Loloa at last. He remembered it as the building he had passed on his first day in Chiralcus, with a foreyard in which a dead tree stood. The lodge box held no porter. His window was broken. Rodvard thought, now this is somehow the model of the Mianase, if I could trace the resemblance. As his feet clicked on the pave up to the door, where one light burned behind a transom and a fan of glass, summoning his force, he knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Far in the interior, steps sounded. Coming. The door was thrown back to show a fat beldame with a robe gathered round her, whose hand trembled slightly with palsy. "What is it?" she said. The light was above and behind him. He could not see her eyes to use his jewel. "I am from the office of account," he said, depending upon sudden inspiration, "in the matter of the demoiselle Asterhax." "Poor hour to be coming," she grumbled. Aye, the Lalette. I will call the matron. They will take her in the morning." She moved aside to let him enter, and as she did so, the light caught her face. His glance, quickened by emergency, caught in those muddy eyes a green flash of mingled hate and greed. "Wait," he said, and touched her wrist. "Perhaps it is not needed to rouse anyone." That covetousness, he could use it. "What do you mean?" "It is a simple matter, not official accounts." He fumbled out a coin or two and pressed them in her hand. The fat face moved into a leer. "Ha, ha! So that's the story. Want to take her, do you? And poor Marcella will be blamed, maybe sent for instruction. It should be worth more." Money again. He experienced a moment of panic. "I am from the office of account," he repeated. "I am to take her there to close her reckoning. You will have the perquisite of her possessions." "Heh, heh. And you the best perquisite. It should be worth more." "Shh! Someone will hear us." He found another pair of coins. "This is all. If not, give back the rest, and call your matron." He turned. She clutched his arm, grumbling in her throat, and he could see she did not believe him in the least, but would be satisfied if given a story to tell. "Come, come." Another stair journey through a silent house, this time upward. The place had the indefinable perfume of many women. The guide shuffled along in the dark, almost complete. Rodvard heard the chink of keys, then a tick against the lock, and the door opened. "Strike a light." Rodvard felt a candle pressed into his hand. Being forced to give his attention to it, Lalette saw him first when the light flared. He heard her gasp, and looked past the little flame to see her standing with dishevelled hair, so lovely beyond the imagined picture that he could not resist running across the room to kiss her astonished lips. She must have been sitting fully dressed in the dark. "Rodvard, how did you come here?" The fat woman shuffled in the background, and he— "No matter now. It can wait. We must go quickly." She stared at him like a sleepwalker. "Where?" "Hurry." There were no more words between them at this time or place. Lalette turned in the feeble light to make a package, but the fat woman said, "Ah, my perquisite," so she only snatched her cloak. The beldame addressed Rodvard. "Now, you use your knife on the lock to show where it was picked, then leave it. Then they know my story is true. A man was here." He hacked at the brass plate that held the keyhole for a moment, and fortune favored by letting one of the screws come loose with a snap, and the fat woman clawed his arm to indicate that was enough. She led the way down the stair. Rodvard could see no eyes, and he and Lalette were suddenly out the door. She turned to face him under the dead tree. "You do not want me any more. How did you find me? Where did you come from?" He thought. Out of one pattern dance of compulsions, and into another. "I do want you, or I would not have come. I could not help it. Did you not receive my letter? I suppose you have some story to cover your utter desertion. I swear I left with Dr. Remigoris a letter for you, telling how I was called to Sedatovix on the most urgent of affairs. And then things happened. I will tell you." "Then it is true. You are one of the sons of the new day." The eyes were hidden, but the tone told clearly how deep was her anger and despair. "I have come for you," he said simply. She uttered a bitter little laugh. "It is somewhat late, my friend. I am one of the licensed whores they call me Onace, and now an attainted criminal." "I know, and so am I for bringing you from there." She took 3 steps in silence. "Where are you taking me?" "A tavern." He had not thought this was part of the plan he had been too excited to make. "Do you lodge in it?" The voice was so small that he knew something lay behind the words. "I have been working in the office of account, and learned of your trouble there," he said, inconsecutively. She turned toward him in the dark street where far down someone walked with a light, the hand on his arm trembling a little. "Oh, Rodvard, they would have put me in that prison for instruction, and then turned me in the street without an obula. I know. See, this is what we are looking for." An inn it was, a palpable inn, beyond the corner with light streaming from its windows. They entered through the public room where a table of men with mugs before them all turned their heads like sunflowers. One of them whispered behind a hand, and there was a snicker. A lugubrious person in dirty apron came to the inner door and said, yeah, he would give them welcome for the night. Supper. No, said they both, and a small girl with her hair in tight braids showed them to a room where there was only one chair and a bed where they would sleep together for the first time since the night in Dame Domijaic's rooms, now in a far country and long ago. Rodvard thought, she is wearing her hair down as an unwedded girl, and that is why they snickered. She sat on the edge of the bed, tossing her head back. Rodvard, she said, you have been unfaithful to me. No, he answered in reaction merely, and the thought that crossed his mind was not of the maid Damaris, but of Lissie, now perhaps herself sleepless, and waiting for the dawn when, your blue star is still bright. She did not move, only crossed her eyes in a spasm of pain. I think perhaps it was another witch. I know one put a spell on you. Did you know I saved you from it? You can go to her, if you wish. Even take the blue star. I do not want it any more. Lalette, do not talk so. He stepped to her on the bed, slipped his arm under both hers where she supported herself, leaning backward, and drove her down, his lips seeking hers. She met him passively, neither giving nor avoiding. Lalette, he breathed again. Now she twisted in his arms. Ah, men think there is only one way to resolve every problem with a girl. It was that I wished to get away from. I will go back. He released her then and lay beside her, unspeaking for a moment. And be sent for instruction, and then turned out, it was that I came to save you from. Oh, I am grateful. I will not go back then, and you can have what you have bought. There was a torture in it that he should at this moment think Maritzel is so generosic. He double-jointed to his feet and began to pace the floor. Lalette, he said, truly you do not understand. We are in real danger, both of us, and cannot afford bitterness. I have not been in this country long enough to know its laws, but I know we have broken more than one, and they are very intent after both of us. You as a witch, and me with the blue star, even though they say witchery is not forbidden here. Now, I ask your true help, as I have helped you. Ah, my friend, of course. What would you have me do? She sat up suddenly with a tear in the corner of her eye, which he affected not to notice, all kindliness. And they began to talk, not of their present emergency, but of their adventures and how strangely they were met there. He gave her a fair tale on almost all, except about Damaris and Lissie. She interrupted now and again, as something he said reminded her of one detail or another, so that neither of them even thought of sleeping until the candle burning down in a pale window spoke of an approaching day. But where our line lies now, I do not know, he concluded. Inconsequently she said, Tell me truly, Rodvard, about the sons of the new day. Her face was toward him as he spoke. He was astonished to catch in her eye a complex thought, something about feeling herself no better than the group she considered thieves and murderers. Well then, we are not murderers and steal from none, he said, as she, remembering the power of the jewel, lowered her head, for she had not told him the fate of Tegville. We are only trying to make a better world where badges of condition are no more needed than here in Mancheret. And men and women, too, do not obtain their possessions by being born into them. That is a strange thing to say to one who is born into a witch family. But, no matter now, what shall we do? I doubt if we can reach the inner border before they set the guards after us. And with the case of this captain against you, you cannot now return to Dulcela. Or can you? We might get a ship that would take us to the Green Islands. I have a brother there somewhere. Who's to pay for passage? For I have little money. Much of my gain has been withheld to pay for the things I needed when I came. And I no money at all. But did you come from Dulcilla by paying? Can we not offer service? He thought of the one-eyed captain in the service, demanded there, but took her hand. You are right, and it is the only thing to try, he said. Come, before any pursuit fairly starts. They crept down the stairs hand in hand like conspirators. At the parlor, Rodvard sacrificed one of his coins to pay for his night's lodging. The thought of Lassie and what she would be doing at this hour was in his mind as they stepped into a street from which the grey light had rubbed out all the night's romance, to leave the city drab and wintry. A milk vendor met him with his goats and gave a swirl of his pipes in greeting. There were few other passengers abroad, but more began to appear as they drew near the harbor area. Carters and busy men and hand porters. Presently, they were among warehouses and places of commerce. Beyond lay the quays and a tangle of masts. Here was a tavern, opening for the day. The proprietor said that a Captain Netznegon had a ship at the fourth dock down, due to sail for the Green Isles with the tide. The place was not hard to find, nor the captain either, standing by the board of his vessel, strong and squat, like a giant beaten into lesser stature by a mallet of one still stronger. A Green Isles captain, I am that, he said. I'll take you there on the smoothest ship that sails the waters. I do not doubt it, said Rodvard, but we have no money in which to work our way. Bluff-heartedness fell away from him, and the glance said he was suspicious of something. What can you do? I'm a clerical, really, but would take other labor merely to reach the Green Isles. Lalette said, I have done sewing and could mend a sail here and there. The captain rubbed a chin peppered with beard. A clerical like you's fair enough, one that could cast accounts. He looked around. Most of you Amarosians, though. Rodvard said joyously, I am not of Mancheret, but of Dulcilla, educated there, and can cast up an account as easily as— There'd be no pay in it, the voyage merely, said the man quickly. We will do it for that, said Rodvard, and touched Captain Netznegon's hand in acceptance. The squat man turned. Ahoy! He shouted. Hines, take these two to the port office and get them cleared for a voyage with us. End of chapter 21. This recording is by Angelique Campbell, August 2018.
Chapter 22 of The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Blue Star, Chapter 22, The Law of Love. For a moment, after the man had spoken, Rodvard felt as though he were falling. He looked at Lalette and saw the same black fear was in her also, but the step was taken. They could only hope to carry matters through at the port office. Hintz was a thin man in a sailor's jacket, who looked over his shoulder back at the captain as he led them down the cobbles to a brick building that Lalette remembered all too well. "You will find it a good voyage. The ship is tight as an egg, but the food not too good," said he. There was a doorman in his coop, who directed Hintz down a hall, whereupon the girl clutched Rodvard's arm and said, "I do not like this. A silly remark, he thought. "We cannot run away now," he said. "It is the only chance." And Hintz was back to say that the proto-Stylarian would entertain them at once. There could be only a moment of waiting. They looked at each other apprehensively. Lalette leaned against a wall and closed her eyes, and a man came down the hall to call them in. Rodvard led the way into a room where a little man sat behind a desk with lines of disobligingness set round his mouth. He said, "You wish to leave the dominion of Mancheret for the barbarous Green Islands?" "It is because of a family matter," said Rodvard. "My wife and I—" The proto-Stylarian looked at Lalette's hair, down in the maiden sweep, then quickly at Rodvard and back to her face. Wrinkles shot up the middle of his forehead. "Wife? Wife? What is your profession? Where is your certificate of employ?" He came up out of his seat, like a small bear, Rodvard thought, peering the more intently at the girl. "Ah, I have it. I know. You are the one I registered for the Mayonnaise. The Desolin. And a witch, too. Guards! Guards!" His voice went treble. 2 or 3 armed men tumbled into the room. "An inquiry," said the proto-Stylarian, flinging up his arm to point at the couple as Hinz shrank back. "These 2 for an inquiry. I accuse her of being a runaway Mayonnaise." The face was distorted, the thought behind it one of the purest delight and triumph. "Be careful with her. She is a witch." Rodvard was gripped above the elbow and jerked stumbling to the door, catching only a glimpse of Lalette's despairing face. Outside, people stopped and goggled as the 2 were hurried along and into a carriage, with a guard beside each. "I am sorry," began Rodvard, but one of the guards said, "Close your clack. No talking among prisoners." His eyes spoke a brutality that would have taken pleasure in a blow. They came to a structure with a battlemented gate, like a small fortress. An odor of sewage emanated from it. A pair of guards brought forward bills in salutation to those entering. Rodvard and Lalette were swung into a gatehouse, where a man lounged at a window, an officer by his shoulder-knot. One of the guards said, "These 2 are in for an inquiry. Authority of the proto-Stylarian Brothvudi. He says to be careful of the woman. She's a witch." The officer looked at Lalette appreciatively, then seated himself at the desk and drew out a paper. "Your names and professions?" he said. Rodvard gave his. Lalette checked over the profession, wishing to cry out that she would not give it, wishing to defy the man. The officer looked at her. "You are warned," he said, "that I am a diaconal, and your witchery will be wasted on me." "Oh," she said, and half choking, "Mayonnaise." "Which covertine? The more trouble it is to obtain the information, the harder it will be with you." "Lolau." The officer turned to one of the guards. "Go to the covertine of Lolau and inform the matron that she is to come here tomorrow morning at the 4th glass for an inquiry in the matter of Demoiselle Lalette." He addressed the other guard. "You wait here while I draw the proclamation calling for information on this Bergelin, then take it around." Rodvard thought of Lys and wondered what she would say in answer to the proclamation. Lalette facing Dame Quazo again. Another pair of guards came in to take them to stone cells, set in the wall of the fortress. Rodvard saw Lalette vanish into one and heard the door clang behind her, then was himself thrust into another. There was a stool and straw on the floor, an archery slit for the only lighting. The place stank, the origin of which odor was a bucket beneath the archery slit. He sat on the stool and tried to think, but the turmoil of fear held him so that he could do little more than run around back and over his own conduct like a mouse, to ask where he had stepped wrongly and what else he could have done to make things come out other than they were. This was the morning when Lys, and he would have been bound to her for life. No, that could not have been the right path. Farther back, then? When he asked that, he went off into a train of reminiscence in which thought almost ceased. His throat was dry, there was no water in the cell. Nor did he seem to have near neighbors, all being silence around, save that somewhere a tiny drip of water increased his thirst. Would he be able to hold anything back tomorrow morning at the inquiry, where an initiate would surely question? Round the circuit of his failure his mind ran again, and slid off into a consideration of present circumstance. He rose, going to the iron-bound door, but even the small trap in it would not open from his side. Alone. Not for the first time. How like the imprisonment on the ship this was, and how dark the prospect had loomed then. Out of that he had risen. But to what? A choice between Lys and this. A wave of misery swept across him, and then he thought of Lalette, and her misery equal to his own, and maybe more. But this was no help either, and he began to examine his prison, finger-breadth by finger-breadth, for something that might take his mind away from this procession of regrets and anxieties toward a future he could not know. There were only accidents of the wall at first, in which he tried to see pictures and carvings, making up a tale for himself, like those in the ballads. This had not gone far when he came to a trace of writing which looked as though someone had tried to wipe it out, for there were only a few words to be read. Horv. In the month. Only for love. God. A cryptic message indeed. He tried to imagine the tale behind it, and how the love of which these Amorosians forever gabbled had brought someone to this cell. This caused him to ask himself whether it was really love for Lalette that had brought him here, for that matter, whether he loved her, and what love was, and to none of these questions could he find a satisfactory answer, because he kept comparing her with Maritzel and wondering whether the emotion were the same. But this in turn brought a deep weariness. He flung himself on the straw to rest and work the matter out, and so doing fell into an uneasy slumber, product of his sleepless night, in which he dreamed that the world was ruled not by the god he had been taught to believe in, nor disputed by the two gods of whom the Amorosians spoke, but by three demons who sat in a closed space with smoke pouring from their mouths, and decided what penalty should be exacted for witchery. A key grated. He woke to see the trap being pulled back from without, and a voice said roughly, "Here's your banquet, my lord. The sweetmeats come with the dancing girls." A plate was thrust through, with a pewter mug of water. On the former were some vegetables, cold and sticky, and no table utensils, but Rodvard was in a mood of hunger that forbade him to be over-nice, and he ate, saving part of his water to cleanse his fingers after the meal. It was hardly done before the trap opened again, and the outer voice demanded, "The tools, pig-face! The administration doesn't give souvenirs to its guests." Rodvard passed the dishes through and seated himself again. Time ticked. The light that had been fading when he woke was all gone. He had slept so much that he could do so no more, and the uncertainty of his lot held him from consecutive thought. Somewhere outside there was a thin cry and a sound of feet. Then quiet again, but for the briefest space. And now another key grated in the main lock of his door. It was flung open. In the space stood a small man and a dark with no cap. Behind him, a smoky torch held by another showed this first visitor to be holding a naked sword that dripped plash-plash on the stone. "You are Bergelin?" he said. "I call myself Damade Slayer. The revolt has begun. Have you the Blue Star safe?" 2. Questions whirled in Rodvard's mind, but the larger of the pair said, "Hurry," and gripped him by the elbow like the guard who had brought him in, dragging along the corridor. "Wait," said Rodvard, resisting. "There is another." "We must hurry," said Damade Slayer. "You do not know how desperate a business this is. We have had to kill." "No, I will not leave her. She is my sweetheart, my witch." "You have her here? Of the two of you, she is the more important. Where is she?" "At the third cell here, I think." Without another word, Slayer counted off. "The torch, Cordisso," and began to try keys from a chain of them. The big man advanced the torch, but the place held only some babbling, furtive creature with white hair and idiot eyes. The next cell was empty. Slayer swore furiously. "You are sure your doxy's here?" "She was brought in with me." He tried another door. It was she, rising surprised from the floor in a whirl of dresses. Rodvard pushed past the small man to grip her by the hands. "Come, and quickly!" She made small, uncomprehending sounds. Rodvard put an arm around her and drew her toward the door, reverse of the stair by which they had been brought in. In the torchlight, Rodvard saw a pair of feet at the base. A dead man, one of the guards. In spite of the hurry, he paused to unbelt the fellow's dag and rushed with the rest, feeling more a man again now the lost knife was replaced. At the outer gate stood two more men, hoods pulled over their faces. They saluted Damade respectfully and led across the street to where a carriage stood, pushing Lalette into the back seat. There were 3 horses, one in front of the pair, according to the Manchuria fashion. One of the hooded men cracked his whip, and they were off at a bumping pace, as Damade Slayer said, "It is well you were placed in arrest and proclaimed this afternoon. We should not have known how to find you otherwise." "Who sent you? Dr. Remigorius?" A shadow winked across the man's face, even in the dark. "The High Center. I say, the revolt has begun, and they are in rule. But you shall be told everything soon." He would say no more. The carriage bumped across cobbles, and they were at the dock, with a man holding a candle lantern by its side. Slayer leapt down without offering a hand to Lalette and sprang across the plank of a ship with, "Hurry!" Already, as she and Rodvard reached the deck, a whistle was blown, and men were moving rapidly among the ropes. They followed their guides beckoning down a ladder to a cabin. He set the lantern on a table. "Let yourselves be placed, and hear me carefully," he said. "It is of the utmost moment to the cause and everything that you are not caught or even held back. If the guards come aboard, if we are stopped by a galley as we leave the harbor, you are strictly to go down the ladder leftward of this cabin. At its base is a pile of bales of goods, of which one is hollowed out to take a man, with a flap at the edge that can be pulled to from inside. Insert yourself and pull the flap." A thrill, more of excitement than apprehension, shot through Rodvard. The thought of being as important as this to the great enterprise. He said, "If this ship's invaded, they will likely have an initiate, or at least one of their diaconals with them, and from the mind of any one aboard, he will be likely to know where the hiding place is." Slayer grinned. "That has been thought of. No one knows of this hollow but me. I made it and can take care of myself." Lalette said, "And I? What shall I do?" Slayer frowned. "You are a problem, demoiselle. We came for friend Rodvard and his blue star, imagining you were still in Desola, and there's no preparation." He put an index finger on his chin. "You have the art. Could you not—" She raised a hand. "Ah, no, never." In the flash of her eye, Rodvard saw how she was thinking of some witchery on a ship, something terrible and sickening connected with it. "Of course," said Slayer. "Against an initiate, it would miss 9 times out of 10. And concealment's a weak resource. No, the problem is one of hiding you in plain sight. That is, to let them look but not know your identity. Ah, I have it. Let your hair down and the hem of your dress up to show an ankle. Be one of those traveling strumpets who call themselves sea witches." Lalette said steadily, "How will this deceive one of the initiates?" Damade Slayer made a twisting with his mouth. "Why, demoiselle, these initiates are not magicians. They can read no more than thoughts, and not all of those. All women have in them a trifle of the strumpet. You have but to think yourself one, be one with your mind. It would be a rare initiate to tell the difference." Lalette's mind beat frantic wings. The bars were there again. Whatever route she took led to the same cage. And Rodvard caught enough of her thought to know how deep was her trouble. "Is there not some better plan?" he asked. "No time. See, the ship is stirring." Damade Slayer stood up. "So now I must leave you." The door banged behind him. Lalette said, "This is a second rescue. from one prison to another each time. I thank you, Rodvard." Her eyes flashed a dark color of anger. He knew what was stirring in her mind, but also that if he mentioned it directly, there would be a flash. He said, "Lalette, let me implore you. I will not quarrel with you about whose making this trouble is, or how we seem to go from one difficulty to another. But if we can work together, this escape shall be better than the last. I did not leave you at the Covertine." "Oh, I am grateful," she said, in the tone of one who is not grateful in the least, turning aside her head. "If you had only—" He had wit enough not to carry this line on. "Do you know anything of this revolt?" he asked. She turned again. "Ah, I cannot bear if that I should never have a thought of my own while I am with you. Will you give me back the blue star?" "No. It is all our lives and fortune now, and the fate of many more important than we." "I am not beautiful and brilliant like those girls of noble houses, but even so would like to be wanted for myself, and not what I can bring." Outside, the first harbor swell caught the ship. She turned her face again, queasy at her stomach. They slept in shut beds on opposite sides of the cabin. End of Chapter 22. Chapter 23 of The Blue Star by Fletcher Pratt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Blue Star, Chapter 23, Netznegon, Return to Glory. The skies were filled with glory, the new day rising. The man who called himself Damade Slayer explained, leaning against the rail at the waist of the ship, in the blue and gold morning, a day anointed with white in the form of a circling seagull. "It's an intricate tale," he said, "of which the sum is that we are unlikely to see queens in Netznegon again. But I'll begin with Clutie's plan for having the nobles gather taxes in their seigneuries. They would not have it." "Something like that seemed to be happening when I was at the conference of court," said Rodvard. "They say there was a scene to remember when Florestan told the old bitch there was no more money," Slayer went on with a laugh. "She beat him about the head with a slipper, and for days he wore a patch over one eye." Lalette said, "She is your queen." She wanted to cry out, to say something that would drive this man to fury. Rodvard drew her hand toward him, but she pulled it away. Damade Slayer said, "I crave your pardon, demoiselle, truly. I did not know you were so royalist." Then Brunavar fell. You heard of it? Rodvard said, "I have had little news, buried in Chiralcus, only that there were troubles. Attainted of treasons, and sent to the throat-cutter. The case was pressed by the Duke of Agremens, very violent against him, no one altogether knows why." "I think I could find a reason." "No doubt, with your stone. But you see the situation that left? With Brunavar gone, there's no regent apparent in the case of Her Majesty's death, which may fall any day. I think it was you who sent word to the centre that Florestan expected the regency in his room. Very likely he would have had it too, but for the tax matter. But the regency question furnishing an excuse, the nobles summoned a general assembly of all the estates, and once they were met, they began to consider everything." "And the revolt?" "Oh, it began in the west, at Veyrelden, with some of the army, and not with our party at all. Brunavar's people joined, setting forward the name of Prince Pavinius, and how he was wrongfully set aside from the succession, and had long since abandoned being an Amorosian. They even persuaded the old man to come out of Mayern and raise his standard. Most of the nobles have gone there with what troops there are, but I don't know how much fighting there has been. Neither side's very anxious for war. The important thing is that the Great Assembly was left in session with the nobles out of it, and you can see what that means." "Not quite. Enlighten me." Why, our party in the majority and Matherin in control of everything." Rodvard turned a face of utter astonishment. "Matherin? How? What? I might have thought Dr. Remigorius—" Slayer laughed again, a sharp bark. "Bergelin, for one who can see the thoughts in a head, you are the ignorantest man I have seen, or one of the cleverest." He shot a quick glance of suspicion at Rodvard. "You truly did not know that Matherin was the head of the High Center, the major leader of the Sons? As for Remigorius, the less you mention him, the better. Some connections are not quite healthy." "I did not know," said Rodvard slowly, trying in his mind to reassort the tumbled building blocks of his world. "But the Blue Star's a treasure, but why send a ship for such a mouse as I am?" "Answer your own question, friend Bergelin. Look, here's Pavinius, the court, our party with its control of the Great Assembly. Maybe some of Trichulacan tendency, and a few Amorosians, all opposed to each other. You are the only man we know can untangle where the true loyalties lie and discover whom we can trust." "But surely this is not the only Blue Star." "The only one we can be sure of. We know the court butler Tuluan had one. Perhaps there is one or more in Pavinius' party." "You said 'had.' Does Tuluan have it no longer?" Slayer looked sidewise, with something a little savage in his glance. "An accident befell him. You know Matherin," said Lalette. "If I understand what you mean, you had him killed. But this would not affect the Blue Star itself." "Not if we could find the heiress. And there's another question also. Suppose we have found her. Does she know enough of the art to make the star active? True witches are very hard to find, with the Episcopal so bitter against the art on the one hand, and the Amorosians draining so many off to Manchuria on the other." "My mother," began Lalette. "Oh, Matherin followed that line up long ago. She could instruct, but would she? I think not for our party. The last I heard, she had followed Clutie and the court out to Zentz." "You, too, are our mainstay." Rodvard, thinking of the witch Kasmerga, and thinking also that it would be little good for the Sons of the New Day to have commerce with her, said, "It should not be hard to trace Tuluan's heiress. I was in the office of pedigree myself once." "One more reason why you're a figure. I'll conceal nothing. Most of those who can read the old hands, or trace the pedigrees, are either fled with the court or little trusty. We dare not place reliance in them. And it's a matter of hurry with the armies in the west both anxious to do us harms, and even the Trichulacans calling out new troops." A whistle blew. Men moved along the ropes, the ship changed slant. Rodvard said, "What you say is very strange. I would like to know— enough of politics for now. I must make my apologies to this lovely demoiselle for having spoken unthinkingly." He offered his arm to Lalette. "Will you honor me?" Rodvard was left standing, and not for the only time either in the next 3 or 4 days, for Lalette formed the habit of walking with Slayer along the deck, she laughing and both of them talking of trifles in a manner that seemed to Rodvard inane and pointless. Of an evening the girl would hardly speak at all, or if she did so, it was in a flat voice, shunning his eyes, so that he could tell little of what she was thinking. At night she shut herself in her lock-bed before undressing. This became so intolerable that at last he rose one night and tapped on the door of her bed. "Open," he said, and over the noise of the thudding rigging heard her say faintly, "Rodvard, no." "Open, I say," he cried again. "You must hear me." There was a silence of 7 breaths, and then he heard her spin the lock. "Lalette," he said, "why do you treat me so?" "Have I treated you worse than you have treated me?" He fought back an impulse to a retort that would bring angers. "I do not know that I follow all you mean." There was only nightshade from the window, she emboldened at knowing he could not learn her fullest thought. Will you still say you did not cheat me? Now that I know you were always one of the sons of the new day. Toloan had an accident, and the doorman at your house, and how many more? I used to believe in some things before you trapped me." "No trap," said he, jerking back so violently he struck a beam and gave an exclamation. "No trap. You cannot make a new world without destroying some of the old, and some suffer unjustly for every gain." In a small voice she said, "I feel used." "Lalette," he said gravely, and not taking offense, "listen to me. We of the Sons of the New Day are truly striving for a better world, one in which there are such things as honesty and justice for everyone. But this much I have learned, and not from Dr. Remigorius, that any such effort is a swimming against the world's stream and must be paid for. You feel used? Myself no less. But I'd like to think of myself as used for the betterment of men, perhaps by God." His voice was a little unsteady at the end, and now it was her turn to be silent for a moment. At last she said, "And how do you know the use is for betterment, not someone's personal pleasure in ordering others? What you say is not too different from the teaching I heard at the Covertine, only there they would say that God uses no earthly vessels. Do you believe that?" "Ah, I do not know. I only know that I am tired and alone, alone." The words tailed off. He heard her shift in the darkness of the bed, and then the intake of a sob. "Lalette, don't cry." He bent over, wiping a tear from her face, then, as it was followed by more, fell to kissing her eyes. "I love you." For the first time since that night on the roofs. "Lalette, Lalette." More and more he kissed, from eyes to lips, and she gripped her arms around him, because he was the nearest anchor in a shifting world, and his kissing turned to passion, as she had known it would, and what did it matter? But she was only a recipient, and to Rodvard it was a relief and an agony. In that moment he wished it had been Lys. 2. It was after sunset bell when they came upstream to Netznegon city, its gated towers rising dark against the west like the worn teeth of giants. Rodvard stood near the prow, hearing the measured cry of seamen at the sweeps. Through all he felt the golden note of glory returning. "Desola," he murmured to himself, "Desola, strong and fair, how shall I contribute to your greatness and so find my own?" He felt himself making a poem of it, but in a rush of emotion so intense that he could not bring the rhymes quite true, nor the rhythm neither, quite. And when he tried to pause and think consciously of how the verses should go, the emotion vanished, and the dark city was only a tumbled pile of stone. The bridge leading to the southern suburbs blotted out the prospect. Little white cakes of ice came swimming like ducks down the stream, and the ship swung to its quay, the one around the curve. There were lanterns there, and a little group waiting. They must have been seen from the walls, and the word passed through to meet them. Someone hallooed to Rodvard from the stern of the ship. Tamade Slayer was waiting there with Lalette, muffled close in her long cloak. Rodvard thought, "We are come back to Desola, both of us, as naked as when we left it, but at least with more hope." Said Slayer, "It would be as well to hurry. It does not do to be on the streets too much at night these days." The back of Rodvard's mind recognized that he had given Lalette no more than a priest's argument that night in the lockbed, and wished that he had found a better, since she must see the defect in this one. But what? How educate her to the ideal? The plank was flung. 5 or 6 men were at the other end, one of them in a provost's cloak, but the shoes were not like what they should be, nor did the doublet seem to belong to the uniform. A longsword bulged out the cloak. The eyes flicked past Rodvard to rest on Lalette. Tamade Slayer identified himself and shepherded his charges past a dark shed to the quayside street. A man was there with a horse. Slayer spoke to him. He swung himself into the saddle and rode off. Said Rodvard, to say something. That provost seemed in an inquiring mood. Slayer: This was no provost. The General Assembly has abolished that hateful order. What you saw was a people's guard. Rodvard: This is a different Desola. Slayer: It will be a better one. Lalette said, Where are we going? To the guest house of the nation, that used to be the palace of Baron Ulutz, who has fled to join Pavinius. The man has gone for a carriage. The conversation winked out. Around a corner of the street, somewhere in the dim, there was a shout that came to them only as the confused "Ya ya" of many throats, followed by a crash of glass and then another shout. What is it? Rodvard looked at Slayer. Some of the people, doubtless. You should know. There are many debts being paid these days. He shrugged. Lalette stirred. Without the Blue Star's intervention, Rodvard knew that she would find in this wild lawlessness the case against his new day. He said, Is there much of this from day to day? The man's voice was indifferent. Enough. It is mostly Zagrainer moneylenders who suffer. Round the corner came a carriage with a single horse, the messenger riding ahead. You will report to the office of the committee at the second glass in the morning, said Slayer to the rider. The fellow's chin was badly shaven. He leaned from the saddle and said, Well, friend Slayer, I will do the best I can, but it will be hard to ride more messages so early, for Mousie here is nearly done, and she's my livelihood. Rodvard now noticed that the horse was drooping with weariness, but Damade Slayer said, If you lose one, there's another. The people's business will not wait. Be on time. The man got slowly down and patted the neck of the horse. Friend Slayer, he said, I am as much for the people as anyone, but there's more to this than livelihood. This is my friend. The tired horse sniffed at the hand he put up. Slayer surprisingly burst into laughter. Go then with your friend. I'll be your warranty if you are late. The carriage had wide seats. Lalette huddled down in the corner so that Rodvard was barely touching the edge of her cloak, and Slayer sat facing them. Beyond the corner, where the turbulence was, figures were visible at a little distance, and torches moving, but nobody said anything in the vehicle, because, thought Rodvard, there was so much to say. Presently they turned in at the gate of the wide-flung Ulutz palace, where some statue on the entrance pillar had been thrown down, leaving broken stone across the cobbles. There were lights in the building, but no doorman. Damade Slayer led the way, and straight up the wide flight of marble steps to a tall walled room, where he struck light to a candle. A huge bed stood in the corner, and one of the chairs had been slit, so that the material of the upholstery flowed upon the carpet. I bid you good night, said their guide. There's a kitchen below stairs where you can have breakfast, and a messenger will call for you in the morning, friend Bergelin. When they were alone, Lalette sat in the good chair with her hands in her lap and looked at her feet. Rodvard, she said at last. Yes? His heart jumped hopefully. Be careful. You are not so important to them as you think. If you were gone, they might make me give the Blue Star to someone else. Could they compel you to put the witchery on it? No, but they might find another witch, Rodvard. He went over to her, but at his touch she made a small gesture of dismissal, as though to rebuke him for bringing something childish into a moment of utter intensity. I am afraid, Rodvard. Don't let them do that to me. He stepped away from her. Ah, pest, you are shying at shadows. I am a member of the Sons, and even so you have the art. Yes, I have that. She only undressed to a shift and wrapped it close around her, sleeping on the far side of the bed. The water was very cold. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Blue Star, Chapter 24, Speeches in the Great Assembly. It was the old Hall of Presence. The throne stood as before, its dark wood bright with jewels, and the jeweled star bright above it, so that Rodvard felt at his back almost a palpable emanation of Desola's high fame. Before him, chairs had been swung out from the walls into the space where all had once stood to hear judgments pronounced from the throne, as in the great days of King Crotinianus, and other chairs brought in, not consonant with those already there. He himself occupied the seat once reserved to the announcer, 2 steps up. A board was placed for him to write on, since this was to be the pretense for his being there. To the right, another step up, was the place once occupied by the chamberlain, which Mathurin would presently take. It also had a board. Rodvard looked out across the hall, now filling with men, most of whom bowed to the throne on entering, in the ancient form. Very few were badged with coronets, and it seemed to Rodvard a cause of hope and pleasure that this was so. There was a solid group of legists, some merchants, and a few men from the lesser orders, though not as many as he had expected. As he watched, the Episcopals came in, 6 of the 7 at once, not looking around at the fall and sudden rise of chatter that attended their entrance. They moved to places in the premier row of chairs. Legist badges began drifting toward them as straws on a stream will be drawn by a log. Mathurin came in. He wore his servant's black and badge of low condition as though they were robes and a crown, strutting visibly. He did not bow to the throne, but walked straight up to the chamberlain's place, sat down, bounced up again immediately, and slapped his palm on the board for attention. As the buzz of talk died reluctantly and men took their places, he watched with tight lips. When only 2 or 3 whisperers remained, he struck the board again and said, "There is a new matter of utmost importance before the assembly of the nation." A solid-looking man who bore the coronet badge stood up into the dramatic pause and said, "I am the Marquis of Palm. There is an old matter for which this assembly was called that I shall never cease to urge. No regent apparent has been—" He was allowed to say no more. A chorus of angry babblings covered his voice, and Mathurin slapped sharply. His voice rose. "I am only the writer before this assembly, and will place before it whatever is desired. But it does not seem to me that it wishes to hear your proposal, Sir Marquis. The more since the matter of which I speak is so great that it overrides every other. I have to say that the nation, already threatened by exterior enemies, is now called upon to face a worse danger, one that will call for all our exertions. It is this: the leaders in whom we have most trusted have turned traitor, and are conspiring with the enemies of the people." Now there were more babblings and angry cries, such as, "Cut their throats!" with a couple of fists brandished aloft. But Rodvard noticed that all the outcry came from one section of the hall behind the Episcopals. One of the latter began fanning himself rapidly. Instead of quieting, the tumult augmented as Mathurin stood sweeping his eyes across it with a half-triumphant air. At last he raised a hand. "I will tell you the worst," he said. "Not in fine words, but brutally, for this is a brutal thing." He shuffled a handful of papers. "No, wait. I will begin with the tale of how this knowledge reached us. At Drog, below the pass that leads through the ragged mountains to Rishaka, there is an inn. Some 8 days gone there came to it a carriage, bearing one of the ladies of the court. Oh, a beautiful lady, all dressed as though for a ball. She came from the north, from Zents, where the court is, and as the road leads to Trichilaka ultimately, her actions roused some suspicion in the mind of the innkeeper. He is a true patriot, and thought she might be carrying wealth away out of the country, in violation of the decree against it. Watched her, and noticed that she was very careful of a certain casket. The innkeeper thereupon summoned people's guards, who seized the casket and broke it open. They found no money, but they found this. Matherin drew from his papers one that seemed to be of parchment, and waved it aloft, so that all could see that it bore at its foot a huge blue seal, star-shaped, the sign manual of the Chancery of the realm. There were sharp intakes of breath and stirring among the chairs. The Episcopal who had been fanning himself stopped. The sturdy man who had described himself as the Marquis of Palm stared aloft with his mouth open and a frown on his face. "Shall I read it to you? No, not word for word, for it is written in Tritulacan, and with the stupid, decorative court phrases that try to hide real meaning." Rodvard thought, he was more orator's tricks than I ever would have imagined. Pause. "Here it is, then. A missive, signed with the name of Count Cludy, himself a Tritulacan by birth, to Pariso, Lord Regent of Tritulaca, but bearing as proof of genuineness the seal of our gracious Majesty the Queen. The substance of it is that, while without doubt the rebellion of her cousin Pavinius, aided though he is by the Mayerns, will soon be put down, the war is likely to be long and wasteful. Her gracious Majesty therefore consents to the proposal of the Lord Pariso, made in the name of true religion and the old friendship between the two houses, that he shall join the army of Desola with not less than 16 shars. And in return for this, it is graciously conceded that Tritulaca has a just claim to the city and province of Ceded Mere, and some of these Tritulacan shars shall pass to the war by way of Netznegon city, to suppress certain disorders there. The rats! There is no dealing with such people." "Shame!" shouted someone almost before he had finished, and now all over the hall men were on their feet and shouting, but among other cries there was one of "Forgery!" Matherin seemed to be waiting for that moment. "Forgery!" he cried, his voice going up almost to the cracking point. "If you think it is forgery, look at it yourself!" And threw the paper outward, as one might the caught hunted animal to the dogs. "Will you call it forgery when I tell you also that the whole Tritulacan fleet has been placed on war standard? The nation is betrayed!" Now the tumult seemed completely out of hand, men moving from place to place confusedly, or trying to say something, and in every eye Rodvard could catch there was nothing but mere fury, which expressed itself in a color of maroon. Matherin looked out on the scene, making no effort at control. But from the first row there rose a tall old man with white hair and a face set in a habitual expression of benevolence, who raised high his white staff of office, by which Rodvard recognized him as the Archiepiscopal Terapus Grodin. Eyes caught the staff. Voice after voice was abstracted from the uproar until only a few still tried to speak, then two, then none. The Archiepiscopal waited until there was a silence broken only by a cough. Matherin pressed Rodvard's shoulder to read the eyes, but the old man only cast one swift glance at the dais before turning to address the assembly. "Sir Writer," he said, "and you, lords and estates of the realm, this is not a pleasant thing that we have heard. There may be some question of the authenticity of this message, or it may have been written merely to deceive. A document from the hand of the heretic Pavinius, who would make himself the equal of God. Yet I will not deny that we must behave as though it were true. For if we do nothing, and it proves to be so, it will be too late. And for myself, I fear it is true. For it is given to the spiritual estate to discern the machinations of the powers of evil. There is before us, then, the question of how, joying in the protection of God, we can circumvent the machinations of the enemy, who has made man and women naturally good into instruments of evil. Let us therefore prayerfully address ourselves to the question of how the realm may escape this trouble. In an emergency equal to this, in the reign of King Chlor with Queen Burdette I, the assembly of the realm set aside their rule in favor of their daughter, with her husband, the great King Crotinianus, of glorious memory. But now there are no heirs female, and of heirs male only Prince Pavinius. Thus we seem faced with the hard choice of accepting him, and so selling the soul to preserve the body, or of adhering to the Queen's will and saving the soul through bodily submission to Tritulaca. But I do not think God demands of us such submission, for our God is a God of joy. We are here met in the high assembly of the realm, which I hold to represent what of the power material has failed to protect its own, and the power spiritual is fully represented. Therefore, though such a step has no basis in law or custom, I say, let us set up a regency in the time of a living queen. It should have members of lords and estates to show forth the source of its authority, and since the true enemy is that power of evil which has led our good queen astray, I humbly offer to preside. He sat. There was a rumor, almost of agreement, but with a little edge in it that left Rodvard glad the archiepiscopal had ended so, for all the rest of what he said might have led them to agree, and it seemed to Rodvard that a regency with lords and episcopals on it would be only the old rule again. Matherin jerked his finger toward one of the brown legists, who had risen and was waiting for attention. "I am the Kranzlar Eskal," said the man. "I will say that this proposal of a regency in the time of a living ruler has good support in law and custom, though it is not generally known. It is now over 8 quadrilles of years since King Balodin II was killed at Bregatz during the Zagrainer Wars, and few remember that only 3 weeks before his death it was determined that he had gone mad, and the barons set up a council of regency. We may, I think, assume a like madness in the Queen's Majesty, since her offer to Pariso is clearly contrary both to the law of the realm and true religion. His claim to Ciudad Mir is based on descent in the male line, since it is well known that the last count of that seigneury wrongfully dispossessed his sister, who survived him to pass on her rights to the crown of de Sola." The bright morning light struck through the window, fairly on the speaker's face, and as he took his place, Rodvard caught from his eye a quick gleam of greed and lust for power, altogether surprising in one who had spoken so dry and calmly. He touched Matherin's arm to mention this, but now 6 more were on their feet to speak, and the rider before the assembly shot his finger at a man with a merchant's badge, in the group that had made the tumult when the Marquis of Palm was shouted down. "I protest," this one bawled. "I am called Brosen Zelitza. We are the assembly of the nation, and therefore already regents in our own right. Why vest the regency in a council? Why should episcopals have the temporal power as well as the spiritual? If no one else dares to speak, I will tell you why. It is because they are sold to Tritulaca. They wish to have the power to complete Clutie's contract, and their objection to it is only a sham." The voice had a curious dynamic quality that seemed to stir the very bones, but in Rodvard's mind, watching the face, there grew only a picture of something with teeth. He could not make out any mind or thought. "By the rule of these episcopals and their mercenaries of the priesthood, the old customs of de Sola were set aside, and it is forbidden that women shall use the art. So de Sola is being made a half-nation like the savage Germanish, with women in bondage, unable to defend—" The voice was stirring them, excitement in the hall, with movements and the scratch of a pushed-back chair. "Corrupt priesthood, refuge of scoundrels and bastards!" Rodvard swept the line of the episcopals, and though they were turned so he could catch no eyes, every pose told of rising indignation. "Who cannot define the God they profess to serve." "Stop!" The archiepiscopal was on his feet again, staff upraised. "Ah, the sword bites, does it? Conspirator! Plot! Stop!" The voice that was accustomed to dominating the vast recesses of the cathedral was thunderous. Up leapt Matherin. "My lord episcopal," he said, "this is the great assembly of the people, where each may speak in turn. When you have heard him, we will hear you." The archiepiscopal swung round, and from his eyes Rodvard could catch the flash of anger clearly enough, but that was not the sole emotion, and the rest was veiled. "I will never hear blasphemy," he said. "As the highest officer of government remaining loyal to the realm, I declare this assembly dissolved. All who love God and Desola, follow me." Amid a renewed outburst, catcalls and shouts of approval mingled. He lifted his staff high and strode toward the door, followed by the others of his class. A good half the legists came behind. The nobles stood, but hung hesitant, looking toward the strong Marquis of Palm. And then, seeing him sit, some returned to their seats. Of the merchants, some followed, but the little knot where the shouting started remained in their seats. When the procession had passed, Matherin said, "The session for this day is closed." He turned toward Rodvard, and the latter saw in the smiling eyes that everything had gone exactly according to plan, and Zalitza was a good man. 2. Rodvard left the Hall of Presence alone, more than a little prideful at being a partaker in great deeds at last, and wondering what the old companions at the Office of Pedigree would say, who had so looked down on and baited him, when they knew he was one of the riders before the great assembly of the nation. Silver spadas were in his pouch. The new clothes were neat. It was the finest day of winter. He felt he must tell someone of his delight in all, lifted his head as he strode, and so striding, inadvertently trod on the heel of one before. The man turned to show a face as young as his own and a clerical badge. His hands were hunched beneath the edge of his jacket. "I beg your grace," said Rodvard. "No matter," said the other. "I was thinking, did you know that the Great Assembly is going to make itself a regency in the place of Queen Burdette?" "No." A pause. "Well, now the Trichelachan Count will find him a better bedfellow. Perhaps we'll have this Prince Pavinius." "The Episcopals left the Assembly." "Oh." Another stop to the conversation. Step to the corner, side by side. The encounter glanced around, with discomfort in his eyes at having nothing to say. "Have you seen the new representation at Leverdaus? It is called The Maid's Problem, and Minora is playing." End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of The Blue Star by Fletcher Pratt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Blue Star. Chapter 25. Interview at the Nation's Guest House. Lalette lay curled on the bed, half propped by pillows under her armpit. Tamade Slayer had unbelted his sword to sit down. It leaned against his chair. Matherin sat in the one by the table, the candle throwing his sharp profile into strong silhouette. Rodvard shifted in the damaged chair, whose lost stuffing made his seat uneasy. "And that was all?" said the writer to the assembly, pinching his lower lip. "Nothing more from Palm, nothing more from the other Episcopals? Pest Bergelin, you are less useful than I had expected." "There was the legist who spoke," said Rodvard. "I think he is a man to beware of. His thought was so ruthless and desirous of power that he would ride down anything." "You mean the Consular Escall?" "That is of some use at all events," said Matherin. "We need more like that, whether as allies or enemies. Things must be stirred. Too many people are careless of who wins." He stood up and began to pace the floor slowly, head thrust forward a little, hands behind him. "Listen, Bergelin, I will be wholly frank with you. We held a meeting of the High Center this afternoon, following the session." Rodvard said, "Are the names of its members still a secret, except for yourself?" Matherin gave a snort. "They will not be long, for things have so fallen out that the High Center and the Council of Regency will be one. You will have guessed that Brozan Zalitza of Argin is one. There's the best speaker in Desola. General Stegaller. He's in charge of the Recruit Bureau technically, but is really organizing what will be a people's army. It may surprise you to know that your old friend Madame Kaja is a member. A wonderful woman for handling matters of detail, and we have to have one of her sex because of our position about the art. But I could wish it were someone beside her. She's so religious." Lalette made a little sound. Rodvard caught sight of her face, and knew she was about to burst into one of her angers. "Will no one tell me what has become of Dr. Remigorius?" he asked, hoping to forestall the outburst. Matherin's pacing stopped. "I forgive you and will tell you, but if you wish health, you will not mention him again. Rat, spy, tool, he has fled to his employer, Prince Pavinius, but he will not live long, so no more of him." Lalette thought, "These are the creatures around my husband, my man, if he is my man, and not merely using me in my blue star." "It was decided," Matherin began, but before he had finished, a mouse slipped from under the edge of the bed and ran rapidly across the floor as though on tiny wheels. Slayer's arm flashed up and out with the scabbarded sword like a striking bird. Blade and beast together arrived at the center of the carpet, and the mouse twitched once and died. Damati Slayer picked up the small corpse and stood looking at it. "Poor creature," he said. "I ask your pardon. Now your children in the hole will starve for lack of the food you went in search of." Rodvard was astounded to see a tear glitter at the edge of the swordsman's eye. "Ah, bah," said Matherin. "Will you defend vermin, Slayer? You'll have use enough for your steel when the new decrees are passed." Rodvard stirred. "What decrees?" Matherin turned, with his back carefully to the candles, Rodvard noticed, so that his face was dark. "There's to be a new court, to try special cases. It was what I was about to mention when interrupted. Treason against the people and nation. You will be writer to it. More important than the sessions of the Assembly." He turned to Lalette. "There is also a part for you. You are one of the keys now." Lalette said unhappily, "In what way?" "As versus these Episcopals. They spread venom, represent the greatest danger we now have to face. Pavinius? I give him a snap of the fingers. He is too nice, with his Mayern foreigners and Western herdsmen. The Tritulacans? Nothing by themselves. They had never beaten Desola in the former war but for the revolt of Manchuret, Mayern help, and the treason of the Germanish chieftains. The court? Now sold to Tritulaca, and destitute by its own action. But the Episcopals are still not out of credit with the people, who have been lulled by their solemn mummery. We drove them from the assembly of the nation this morning, good. But now they may join Tritulaca in the name of what they call true religion." "But what have I to do with the Episcopals?" asked the girl. "Child, fool, use your art. Not to the death. They'd only fill the office with another man. But paralyze, cripple, drive idiot. The Archiepiscopal Grodin notably. His loss would hurt them most." Lalette sat up. "Sir Matherin, you do not by any means understand this matter of the art. Grodin is protected by the holy oils, and nothing I can do will bite on him." "It is you that do not understand. I do assure you that if Grodin be taken in a moment of anger, as today, or other violent passion, neither his oils nor any other thing can protect him from your ministrations. Be assured, we will provide the occasion." Lalette's mouth twitched. She wanted to cry, "Not for any reward or punishment you can give," but it was a moment before she said, "Am I the only witch in Desola?" Matherin made a grating sound. "No. I'll be open. We are pressing the search. Have found 3 others, aside from those who claim the art, but could witch nothing more consequential than a frog or chicken. One is an old beldam who has nearly lost her wits and can be made to understand nothing. One's a young girl, witch enough, but never taught, did not know the patterns, and beside, she ran away. One we caught, not found. She was in Chancellor Floreston's pay." He drew a finger across his throat. "None of them heiress to a blue star." "I am not sure I can follow all the patterns myself," said Lalette. "I have used the art so little." Matherin looked at her sharply. "Hark," he said. "I see your slowness, but you more than another should be on our side, as witch and woman. The art has almost died out, driven down by priest and episcopal. There are likely many with the right inheritance who do not know it, never taught. Yet it's a woman's defense. We have the butler Tuloan's blue star, for instance, but where's the girl can bring it to life? We do not even know her name." He whirled suddenly and flung out an arm toward Rodvard in an oratorical gesture. "Bergelin! I remember. That was the other matter. You were in the office of pedigree. Know its secrets. Forget the Great Assembly for the time. That's under control. Until the new court's set up, your task is seeking out Tuloan's heiress. I'll give you an authority." "It may be somewhat harder than you think," said Rodvard. "I did not say it would be easy. I said it would be done," said Matherin. "Slayer, let us go." 2. When they were out, he turned to look at Lalette. She had sagged down, with her face in the pillow, and now, without moving, she said as before, "Rodvard." He went across the room and put an arm around her. "What is it?" "My mother. She is with the court, and she knows the patterns. If that man takes her, he will have her throat cut." The fate of many thousands, and the guarantee of the future, with the art not in the hands of ignorant peasants, but women of intelligence and goodwill, balanced against one lie. But how to say it? He said, "Has she shown so much concern for you?" Lalette twisted under his arm. "If she had, would I know it? You hold me a prisoner, you and your Dr. Remigorius, who does not deliver letters, and your Madame Kaja, who will sell me, and your Matherin, who wants to cut my mother's throat. I never knew what dirt was till I knew you." Rodvard felt the blood beat at his temples. He wanted to strike her, to make a fiery retort. He released her, stood up, and began to walk the floor. No, no. A quarrel so entered could never be composed. Look beyond it, Rodvard. See how the world would be without her. Somewhere, perhaps, there was another who would have more response for an interior fidelity deeper than any single act, would not drive him from her side with bitter words when— He thought of Maritzel of Stojenrosic, and by this route came again to the high purpose. No, it was mere selfishness to let his own thought, his own problem stand first, the very thing he had wished to bring her to see. Keep the peace. A small sound made him turn. She was just settling into place among the covers, and her face turned toward him. "Oh, Rodvard," she said, "help me. I can't do it. The Episcopal—" Nothing more was said on the subject, but that night they slept in each other's arms. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Blue Star, Chapter 26. The Court of Special Cases. Punctual to the hour, as Rodvard and Lalette sat at breakfast with the woman who cared for the kitchen and a Green Islands buyer of northern wools, there arrived a messenger bearing the authority signed by Mathurin to consult all documents and registers in the office of pedigree, even those hitherto held under ecclesiastical seal. For Lalette also, a note. The archiepiscopal had declared himself in seclusion for prayer, and she would be notified further. Between them that morning there was a truce to contention. They walked for a while in the gardens among dead, rustling leaves, and she kissed him sweetly when he left. On the way to the office of pedigree, Rodvard thought of Asper Poltan and the rest when he walked in with an authority to examine the sealed registers, but this small triumph was denied him. Poltan was nowhere to be seen, and in the distributing office was only an old, dry, dusty man Rodvard remembered as having seen once or twice with some documents close to his nose. He held Rodvard's paper in the same manner, sniffed as though it had an unpleasant odor, and shufflingly led the way to the sealed strong-room, which he unlocked with a creaking key. There seemed fewer people than usual in the halls. The sealed files themselves showed the search likely to be a long one. Mostly old, written in crabbed hands, and largely concerned with the illegitimacies of persons now forgotten, or convictions of witchery in cases that now had no meaning. Of the specific line of Toloan there was no trace that morning, and the older records of families having Germanish blood were so badly kept as to indicate a long search. At noon, Rodvard went to a tavern and lingered over his mug to savor the gossip of the town, but that was something of a failure too, for there was none of the high excitement over the doings of the great assembly he had expected. The only group he overheard specifically were 3 or 4 merchants at a table, rather gloomily discussing the rise in the price of wool caused by the troubles in the West, and the fall in the price of southern wine, which kept coming in from oversea and could not be dispatched to the disturbed seigneuries. Nobody said a word about the Episcopals. The only time the court was mentioned, there was a little growling over the name of Florestan. In the afternoon, Rodvard began by setting aside the registers that had to do with the 3 northernmost seigneuries, Bregatz, Vivensteg, and Oltrug. But the task was so wearisome, and his mind so occupied with other topics, that he put them away early. It seemed to him, as he summoned the caretaker to lock the room, that there was nothing in the world as dear or desirable as Lalette. If he could only somehow reach an agreement with her, all troubles would vanish away. As he walked back toward the Ulut's palace, he thought that if they could only sit down in the clear winter air after last night's storm, all coils would be unwoven. But she was not in the room when he arrived, and when he found her, it was on a bench among the garden alleys, wrapped in a cloak and laughing as she talked to Damade's slayer. The swordsman leapt up at his coming. "Hail, daunting dompter of the written page!" he said in a tone which was that of a banter between friends, but with something in it that made Rodvard look sharply at the eyes. Clear as speech the thought came through. And this long-legged booby, who has never handled a weapon in his life, will lie with her tonight while I'm alone. Rodvard said, a little unevenly, "I have made a beginning. Are there any tidings?" "Not in the assembly," said Slayer. "Much discussion of how to raise troops for the People's Army, and a report by General Stegaller. The decree for your court." "My court?" said Rodvard, thinking of the Queen. "That judgment in special cases." The eyes had gone blank. "You'll be a writer to it, as Mathurin to the Assembly. If there's anyone you have a grudge against, name him for trial." He laughed. So did Lalette, and as Rodvard caught her eye, he saw in it a color of regret that he could not be as gay as the swordsman, and a wave of dislike for the man who had rescued him from Chiralca's prison contracted his veins. "I think I saw in the library a book by Momoroso that I have never read," he said. "I will see you before table, Lalette." 2. "The session will recess," said the Kranzlar Eskol. He rose and swept the courtroom with his curious lackluster eye that never seemed to be settled on anything. "I will go over the evidence with you, Bergelin." The legist on his right, the Zagrainer, frowned. He on the left leaned his chin on his hand and his elbow on the table. The accused, a man with a coronet badge, iron-gray hair, and heavy dewlaps, looked disconcerted. Rodvard gathered his papers and followed the president of the court to the little room in rear. When they were there, "What have you found?" asked the legist. "I think he tells the truth," said Rodvard, "when he says he has given no help to the Queen's party or Pavinius. When you asked him that, however, there was something like fear, perhaps for his brother. It was not clear." "Ah." The legist placed his fingers together and studied them. "Bergelin," he said after a moment, "you are to remember that this is a special court of inquiry. We are empowered to handle not only direct treasons, but matters which the ordinary law holds criminal. Such acts dissipate the resources that of right belong to the nation. You tend to be narrow. Let us return." As they came in, one of the guards nudged the prisoner forward again. The jurist-president frowned on him portentously. "Kettersell," he said, "a brief examination of the record shows no evidence of your giving aid to either of the two destituted persons who claim to rule the realm of Desola. Unless my fellow jurists disagree, of that you are acquitted." He glanced at one and the other. The Zagrainer gave a somewhat unwilling nod. The third legist had only an absent expression. "But in pleading innocence of giving such aid, you are answering a charge that has never been brought. If you say you are not guilty of garroting people by night in King Crotinianus Square, we will find you innocent of that also, and so through a list of possible crimes, did it not waste this court's time to agree with you that you have committed none of them. But you are charged with treason to the nation, which, in its essence, consists not of any specific act, but of a point of view, which may be proved by a number of actions, in themselves bearing an innocent appearance until they are assembled with each other. I take it my fellow jurists agree?" He looked again, and again those in the lower seats nodded. "Kettersell," he said, "answer me. You have a brother with the court?" The man cleared his throat. "I have answered that. He is a capellan in the Eagle Shar of Her Majesty's Lancers." The shadow of worry was behind the man's eye, now deepened and very surprising in such a person, whom one would have expected to be concerned about gold scudi or the fidelity of his mistress. "The nation's Lancers," corrected Eskol. "Kettersell, are both you and your brother married?" "Only him, the Baron." "Has he daughters?" "No, only a son." "If your brother should fall in the fighting, where would the inheritance lie?" Now the fear was at the front and perfectly sharp. It was a fear of being left penniless. Kettersell said slowly, and lying, "I am not sure. Would have to consult the Office of Pedigree. There is a cousin, I think, to whom the income would fall. The title and the estate would pass to the son, of course." "How old is the son?" 24. "I see." The jurist-president moved his lips, and Rodvard observed that the man before him was perspiring with the effort to keep some thought down, a thought which came to the watcher dark as sin and midnight. "Is your nephew married?" "To one of the Blenau family." Rodvard sighed. Without appearing to see him, the jurist-president said, "Kettersell, you are engaged in concealments. It is useless. What is the trouble between you and your nephew?" The man's self-control split apart suddenly. He flung at Rodvard a glance of purest venom and burst out, "The damned young puppy is trying to have his own father killed so he may have the title for his whore of a wife. There is no reason, none at all, why he should take a command in the Eagle Shar. He is an old man, taking the task of that young bastard in the Lancers, where all the fighting is." There was a little murmur in the courtroom. The jurist president said, "Why did he accept the charge?" It was the wrong line. Kettersel's eyes were perfectly clear. "To spare his son, I suppose. My nephew was appointed earlier." Rodvard coughed. Kronslor Eskel said, "Where are your nephew and his wife now?" The man paused, and in that pause the thing came through. It took Rodvard a minute or two to realize what it was. "I heard of them last at Landon Senza." Rodvard stepped up to the jurist's seat, with one finger on the paper to maintain the fiction, and whispered, "His true concern is not his brother, but because he wishes to lie with his nephew's wife. I think she may have refused him, but he still believes it may be done somehow if the nephew can be killed before his brother." Eskel put a finger beside Rodvard's. "That is correct, after all," and turned to the prisoner. "Kettersel, your concern for your brother does you the greatest credit. It is evident that you have been in correspondence with him, but I think my brother jurists will agree when I pronounce you guiltless of true treason and order your release." The two jurists wagged their heads silently and in unison, like those toys with flexible necks which children play with during the winter festival. "We will hear the next case." End of chapter 26.
Chapter 27 of The Blue Star. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Angelique G. Campbell, August 2018. The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT. Winter Light. As Rodvard left the courtroom, Demade Slayer fell into step beside him. The man was determinedly, if coldly, friendly. How to shake him off? Instead of leading him home to Lalette, and another of those conversations in 3, where Rodvard felt himself so much hearing a language he did not understand that he always ultimately fled them for a book or the outer air. "Eshol is one of our best," said the swordsman, kicking at the skin of a fruit, "but there is a judgment I fail to understand." "Which one?" "The merchant who was confiscated for bringing wool carts past the iron camp." "Oh, bah, no. He had money. The nation needs it. That's crime enough. I spoke of the Baron's brother, the noble Kettersel." "No more did I understand it," said Rodvard. "As dirty a character as I ever saw. But the Kronzler let him go and praised him." "Ho, ho," said Slayer. "It begins to come clear. What's the tale?" "Why, he was after his nephew's wife. Whether for her money or her body the most, I am not sure. But he wants both." He could not resist adding, "And it's a poor task to break up a couple at any time, for it destroys two people's chance of happiness for the temporary pleasure of one." "Not always," said Slayer, avoiding his eyes. "But I am interrupting. Is there more?" "His only fear is that the Baron will die before the son, and so the right of remarrying the girl will pass to another family. I did not tell the Kronzler because it was not clear enough, but I think he is planning murder. Yet Eshol let him go." Slayer laughed. "Bergelin," he said, "do not lose your innocence. It may save your life some day, for no one will ever believe you are subtle enough to be dangerous. I said Eshol was one of our best. Depend upon it. He thought more deeply than you, and without any witchstone to help him. Why, it is precisely because Kettersol has murder and rape at the back of his mind that he was let go. For exactly the opposite reason, the court will condemn Palm as soon as there's a pretext for a trial. Mathurin has arranged it so. I am innocent again, and do not quite understand the reason. Yet you will dabble in high politic. Hark now. Are not all of the noble orders enemies of the new day by constitution, by existence? Are not all their private virtues overwhelmed by this public fault? The true villains among them will sooner or later dig their own graves and save us the trouble, bringing discredit on the whole in the process. But when you have one like Palm, or the late Baron Brunevar, he's dangerous. Set people to loving the institution because they cannot hate the man, and so must be pulled down by force. For that matter, we need something to stir the people, make them fight for their liberty. This seems a hard way, said Rodvard, trying to resolve the torsion in his mind. It is a hard life, and hardest for those who avoid battle, said Demade Slayer. And Rodvard not replying, they walked in silence. Would this new system somehow produce men of better heart and purpose? For he did not see how the hardness could be justified else. And now his mind fell to wagging between man-system, system-man, and he decided that the justification of the system would be that it produced better men generally, and not merely a few of the best. No, not that either. For that was to confuse politic with ethic, and each was itself a system. For the one would make men good without regard to their happiness, and the other make them happy without regard to their good. Or what was good? Where was the standard? By the system of Mancheret. Will you go on to the quays? Said Slayer's voice, suddenly, and Rodvard found himself 3 steps beyond the entrance to the palace Alutes. I am weary tonight, said Rodvard, perhaps because I am so innocent that this affair of spying upon the minds of my fellows is somewhat unpleasant. He extended his hand to bid good night. Oh, I am going with you, said the swordsman, and he caught Rodvard's glance of aversion. I cannot bear to be without your company. His face went sober, and he quick-stepped beside Rodvard's dragging feet up the entrance walk. This is Mathurin's arrangement, also, in case it troubles you. Did you not notice those 2 men who followed us from the court at half a square's distance? There will be another outside tonight. People's guards. But I have done nothing but your duty to the nation. True. And for that reason precisely, it is needful to guard you like an egg sought after by weasels. Do you think the fact that you bear the blue star is a secret? There are not a few persons who may be brought before the court that would rather conceal an assassination than what they have in their minds. You and I may have our fight on our hands. His face lighted with pleasure at the prospect. Part 2. They paced slowly through the dead garden, along a walk so narrow that shoulders sometimes touched. Lalette could hear the tiny tinkle of the chain that bound Slayer's sword to his hip when that touch came. She knew he was stirred, and the rousing of emotion was not unpleasant to her. Beyond the slate roofs of the town, the sun was sinking redly through striations of cloud. All things lay in a peace that was the peace of the end of the world. He turned his head. "Demoiselle," he said, "what will you give for news?" "Oh, hush," said she. "You spoil it. For a moment I was immortal." "I ask your grace. But truly I have news for you, and it should please you. Sit here and tell me." She took her place on a marble bench beneath the skeleton of an espaliered peach against the wall. "You will not have to use your art against the archpriest, Groadon. Does that not please you?" "More than you know. What is the reason?" "He has fled, slipped through the watch set on his palace and gone. Whether to hell, the court, or Trat Ulica, no one knows. I am glad. She looked straight before her for a moment. Ah, if things were better ordered. You are not as pleased as you might be. Oh, I am, but Rodvard. What has he done? Oh, it's no fault of his. You will tell no one. She laid a cold hand on his warm one. He has found who the heiress of Tuolin is, but does not know whether to tell Mathurin or not. Who is she? A child, 13 years old. She lives at Daolina, up on the Ultrog signatory. But I do not know how long Rodvard will keep the secret. He feels a sense of duty. Why should he not? What withholds him from telling? I would have to teach her the patterns and everything. I do not wish it. She shivered slightly. And to be a witch. The rising shades had drowned the sun. A silence came on the garden, so utter that Lalette felt she could hear her own heartbeat, and Amadei stares beside her. The trees stood straight. The ruins of the flowers did not stir. In that enchanted stillness she seemed to float without power of motion. He leaned toward her, his arm close against her back. His other hand crept over her too. "Demoiselle Lalette," he said in a voice so low it did not break the quiet. "I love you. Come away with me." Her bent-down head shook slowly. Tears gathered behind the almost closed eyes. The arm around her back slid slowly beneath her own arm. The hand groped to close slowly around one soft breast. As though it were by no volition of her own, her head came back to meet the kiss. The tears ran down her cheek to touch his. He drew from her and began to speak rapidly in a voice low and urgent. "Come with me. I will take you away from every unhappiness. We can go beyond finding. I am a fighting man, can find a need for my service anywhere. It does not matter. We can forget all this entanglement and make our own world. I have money enough. We can go to the Green Islands, and you will never have to use the art again. Oh, Lalette, I would even take you to the court and join your mother. Do you wish it?" Her lips barely moving, she said, "And Rodvard?" He kissed her again. "Bergelin, you owe him nothing. What has he done for you? And now he will tell Mathurin about the heiress of Tuolin, and there will be no more place for you, except with me. I will always have a place for you, Lalette, now or 1,000 years from now. Or do you fear him? I am the better man." Now her eyes opened wide on the first star, low in the darkening sky, and with one hand she gently disengaged his clasp from her breast. "No, Demade, I cannot. Perhaps for that reason, but I cannot. We had better go in now." Part 3. "Friend Bergelin! Friend Bergelin!" The voice from below stairs brought back to a consciousness of unhappiness the mind that had lost itself in the sweet cadences and imagined worlds of Momoroso. Rodvard sprang up and threw open the door. "What will you have?" "Someone to see you." Down the hall another door closed. It would be the little old man who asked so many questions, and went almost a tiptoe, as though always prepared to look through a keyhole. From the stairhead, Rodvard could see in the evening's first shades a figure covered with a long cloak, somehow familiar, with the face hooded over. "Beg her to come up," he called. The figure mounted with one hand on the banister, in the slow manner of the old. Near the last step his mind clicked. He was not surprised when in the room the hood fell back to show Madame Kaja. Face cold as ice, he remained standing. She came across the room in a whirl of skirts with both hands out. "My dear boy," she said. With the hangings at the window, it was too dim to see how far her sincerity went. "I am more than honored to have one of the regents," he said, and let it hang. "Oh, you are the most necessary of all," she said, and frou-froued to the best chair. "I hope you have forgiven me. It was so necessary. Someone had filed an information with the provost that I was part of the new day, and it was such a help. Isn't it too bad about the Episcopals not cooperating? But there are so many of the priests on our side." She had seated herself where her face was in the shadow. "Madame, why have you come?" he asked brutally. There was a silence in the darkening room. Then, "To help you," said the voice that, though it might no longer sing, had not lost its silver in speech. "I will make a light." She stirred. "Do not. It is better so. I know. You are thinking of the blue star. Do you imagine that I fear your using it? No." He sat quietly, noting with the back of his mind how the dubious nicety had dropped from her voice, and thinking that this was the woman who had been taken into the high centre. Once more she seemed to gather her forces. "Rodvard Bergelin," she said, "do you know why I am in the high centre?" "I think so." "I will tell you. It may be that in my ancestry there's a strain from one of the witch families. It may be because I sincerely serve God. I do not know. But it has been given to me to be able to trace certain secrets of the heart." Her multitudinous bracelets jingled as she lifted a hand to her breast. "Not as you do with the blue star." She was silent again, and he, unable to restrain an impulse toward malice, said, "Your success in understanding Dr. Remigorius was as great as my own." "Rodvard, you are so unfair." She dropped for a moment in the old manner, then seemed to shake herself. "I know. Your witch will never forgive me. Not that I brought the provost, but that I came in that day when you were on the bed. I do not care. She brings an evil art into our new day." "Do you think so?" "Rodvard, hear me. This witch, to whom you are affected, will one day be the end of you. I have seen her but little, yet I know. It is your nature to give offense, and hers to take it. Sooner or later it will happen that she will find something not to be borne, and put a witchery on you that will strike like lightning." This clipped him close. With a certain convulsion round the heart, he remembered Lalette's sudden occasional rages. "Well," he said, "what would you have me do?" "Bid her farewell. Both of you can find partners better suited." Rodvard came to his feet and walked across the room slowly, thinking in little flashes of sweet Lissy and Maritzel of Seljenrosek. Madame Kasha sat immobile. "No," he said, "better or worse, I will not give her up for anything." Madame Kasha also stood. "Forgive an old woman," she said, and gathering her cloak around her, slipped out the door. End of chapter 27. Recording by Angelique G. Campbell. August 2018. Chapter 28 of The Blue Star. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Angelique G. Campbell. August 2018. The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT. Embers Revived. "We will hear the next case," said the Kronzler Eschol. The People's Guard opened the door to the room of the accused and called, "Bring her in," while a sharp-faced countryman stepped forward from the rear of the court, 2 more guards behind him. The countryman had a merchant's badge and so quick an eye that Rodvard gazed at him, fascinated to see what it would tell, and was therefore unprepared when he turned his head to see the accused. It was Maritzel of Seljenrosek, a morsel pale behind her red lips, still even when she moved, and much changed. How? Rodvard asked himself, and could find no answer, but in a certain lessening of fibre that was expressed around the mouth, though the breathtaking thrill of her presence was still so much there that he swallowed. A crazy-faced prosecutor stepped forward. "I present an accusation of treason against the nation on the part of the demoiselle Maritzel of Stojanrozek, mistress of Count Cludy, and foreign traitor. I call the innkeeper of Drog." Mistress of Count Cludy? And Drog? The sharp-faced man stood forth. Maritzel turned to look at him, and as her eyes turned back, they fell on Rodvard. She started, and before she looked down again, he caught from them an arrow of purest and most astounding hatred. "Tell us your story," said the jurist president. "I keep a good house," said the man, twisting his cap in his hands, "and I have to be careful to preserve its reputation because—" The prosecutor touched his arm. "Give your condition first." Head bobbed. "Thank you, friend. I am keeper of the Inn Star of Drossela at Drog, on the road through the Pass of Pikes in the Ragged Mountains, and mine is the largest inn there, with 3 upper rooms beside the general chamber." Maritzel was looking at him again, not now with hatred, but weariness of the world, and the thought that he, Rodvard, was as dreary as any part of it. "It has never been necessary for the provost to come to my place except when I called them. Now, when this woman came into my inn, I knew right away something was wrong. Late at night it was, and she and a 3-horse coach with the driver, and that seemed strange." The prosecutor halted him again. "Explain why you thought something was wrong. Look at her. She comes evidently from the court and bears the marks of it." He jabbed a finger at the girl, but it was Rodvard she looked at, a long, slow glance, in which was some decision to make a desperate appeal. "When I saw her, I think to myself, as a man often will, that this is not the place for a court woman to be, not with the court ends ends. So I think this is a good one to watch, and perhaps I will learn something. She sat apart from the coachmaster in the high dining room, she did. While she was supping, I served her myself, and marked how there was a little casket she kept beside herself, and touched her hand to, even while she was eating." Her face now outwardly held the appeal, but a plan was building in her mind. He could see it grow stone by stone, but not clearly what it was, because little hate flashes continued to jag across the picture. "So I said to her that if her casket was that precious, I ought to hold it in the strong box of the inn, there being so many wandering soldiers about. When I said this, her ladyship," he grinned a vulpine grin to show this was intended for a joke, "said no, she would as soon lose her life as the casket, which, being so small, I think it must have had in it something beside jewels. So I said to myself, here is some mystery, but if anyone can unlock it, it is my friend Clabb, that was a provost of the court at Seduce till it was broken up. So, while her ladyship was at the dessert, I slipped out to find my friend Clabb, and let him walk past the door to look at her. The minute he saw her—" "One moment," said the prosecutor, and addressed the court. "I present the former provost Clabb, now a people's guard." He motioned to a man behind who took the innkeeper's place. "Tell your story." "Yes, your friend. I saw her through the door as I went past, and I knew her at once from Maritzel Stojanrozek, because I had seen her before. She is the one Count Cludy brought to Sedadivix to be his mistress after the spring festival. I told this to friend Brazel, and he said if she was as close as that to Count Cludy, she had no business in Drog. So we went in, and under pain of the sword, made her give up the casket. It had some jewels in it, but underneath the lining was the letter. "The letter is here," said the prosecutor, handing up a parchment, partly torn, but bearing the unmistakable blue star seal. "It is a document already famous, in which Clutie beseeches the aid of the Tratulicans in return for cessions of territory. Most treasonable matter." Said Chancellor Eshel, looking at it as though he had never seen it before. The Ziggunar jurist craned his neck. Her plan was complete now. She took one step forward, and in a low, urgent whisper said, "Rodvard, help me." It was an entreaty, and as though she knew of the use of the jewel, she was projecting a promise behind the entreaty, and the plan was behind the promise. But it was as though that "help me" laid a compulsion on him. Rodvard turned round as Eshel was handing the parchment to the third jurist. "Your pardon, Chancellor." A frown. "Very well, I will see it." Rodvard stepped to the bench and whispered, "She is thinking of some sort of plan. I do not know for what. I think I could find out, if I could question her alone. I knew her in the old days." "I see." Eshel addressed the court. "This is perhaps the foulest piece of treason in the history of Dulcela, and we have proof that the message is no forgery in the recent march of the Tratulican Shars over the southern border, and the delivery to them without a battle of the castle of Falstad. It is evident that the accused had full knowledge of the contents of this letter, and is therefore guilty of taking part in a vile conspiracy against the nation. But this court is required to follow every treason to its source, not merely to establish individual guilts. We will postpone this matter for inquiry and pass to the next case." Part 2. Rodvard sprang up as she was led into the room, hurrying to get her one of the comfortless chairs from the row against the wall. The guard leered at him, with a thought so nasty that Rodvard's tongue stumbled as he said, "She wants to tell me something in private." The guard laughed, glanced at the barred window, and slammed the door. Maritzel said, "Rodvard, I do not want to go to the throat-cutter." "What can I do?" said he. Her hands clenched, fingers entwined in fingers. "Take me away. You are the writer to this court. Can you not make an order or something for my release to be transported elsewhere?" This was the plan, but it was not the whole plan. And yet, under the magic of her presence, the words seemed to count more than what lay behind them. It would be very difficult," he said. "The order would have to be countersigned and you are a writer," a note of scorn in her voice. "You mean I should forge the signature?" "Why not? This regency of yours is hopeless. I have been confined, but even I know that. How many Shar soldiers do you order? Enough to fight the court, and all Tratulica?" Now it was Rodvard's turn to be uneasy, for he had asked himself these questions. "The people will rise," he said. "Have they risen yet? Where are their weapons? How many leaders do you have who can set a battle in order? Pavinius will never fight with the Tratulicans. They'll compose." Now, genuine black anger jutted from her eyes. "All you can do, here in this little dream world, is lay the ground for vengeance on yourselves." She was near enough to reach out a hand and touch him. "Take me away. I do not want to go to the throat-cutter, and I do not want you to either." "And you would have me betray?" Her eyes flashed a resolve. Before he could say more, she was out of her chair, arms around his shoulders, cheek caressing his head. "Ah, Rodvard, I will make it up to you." He stood up in the circle of her arms, her head tilted back, the long lashes lying on her cheek over veiled eyes. Mistake, he thought, a sudden rivulet of cold running down his spine. "It cannot be true. You were hating me a moment ago. Think I see your plan now." He held her off with rough hands on her shoulders. "You are Clutie's mistress," he said. The liquid flesh changed to brass. The eyes snapped open as she shook herself free. "Yes, I am Clutie's mistress," she cried. And whose fault is it? I was a good girl once. I would have given you everything and remained good no matter what I did for you. You did not want me." She was down in the chair again, crying through her fingers. "You are too much like him," she said, and he, wrung by the thought of that fair neck delivered to the executioner, laid a hand on her shoulder and said, "I will do what I can. Now, Chancellor Eschel must be persuaded, if possible, that though there had been a treason, it was a treason done for love and could be passed over." Part 3. Rodvard came in late, and had had no supper save some bread and cheese, caught at an inn with the 2 people's guards who accompanied him, Demade having left long before. Lalette was arranging her hair before the mirror, with a candle on either side, and did not turn round. At the sight of her lifted graceful arms, a wave of tenderness swept over him. "Lalette," he said, almost lilting the word. "Good evening." She still did not turn, and the voice was formal. He hurried across the room in long steps and turned her around. "What has happened?" There was an impatient movement. "Don't. You will spoil my hair." "Nothing." "Lalette, there is something. Tell me." She kept her eyes away from him. "Nothing." And then, as he stood merely waiting in burning intensity, "A small thing, truly. You need not be troubled. Only I know now who it was you were unfaithful to me with." He was hot and cold together. "Who says I was unfaithful?" "Will you come with me now?" she quoted. "Rodvard, you may be able to read some of my thoughts, but do not forget why. Is she a witch too? She must be, or my blue star that I lent you would be dead. Or did she give you another before you shared her with Count Clutie? She wanted to hurt him as she had been hurt, to make him regret and feel that no regret in any fashion could replace what had been lost. Shared her with Count Clutie." He could feel honest indignation now. "Lalette, who are you talking about?" "I am glad you saved her life," said she, still not looking at him. "It is a pity my hair is dark and my skin muddy. When these troubles are over, you can have a good time with her on the estate. It is in Zeta, isn't it?" The indignation no longer needed to be pushed. All he could think of was how he had rejected the shell of that Maritzel once desired. He said, "Lalette, I swear to you that I have never been with Maritzel of Stojan-Rozek, if that is the one you mean. I swear that I never will. I don't even want her." The accent of sincerity was making her doubt, but the bitterness persisted beneath. She had only lost the line somewhere, and was not yet ready to release him. "If you are really in love with her, you may go. Only I will not be one of your casual contacts." He was invaded by despair of making her understand, with or without the fullest tale of the maid Demarius and the witch of Casmercia. "Why," he cried, "it would seem to me that it is asked of any pair who live together to protect each other from casual contacts by one means or another. But this is merely not true. Will you listen to every tale-bearer who tries to split us apart for reasons of his own?" She lowered her head, melting a little, knowing he knew of Demade desire, if not of her own temptation. "There are some tales you might have borne to me yourself, instead of letting me learn them by hazard. Why did you betray me by telling Mathurin of the child of Dialana, Torlin's heiress?" Now he took her strongly by the shoulders. "Lalette," he said, "I never told him. You accuse me of being a liar and betrayer. Do you think I am a fool as well? If Mathurin knows of her, he has learned it through some other source. You are the only one I told." Suddenly and dreadfully, she knew where that other source was. That night in the garden, when she herself told Demade Mathurin's voice and sword. She moved close, putting both arms around him in a convulsive gesture. "Oh, Rodvard," she said, "I am afraid. He is having her brought here, and will make her a witch himself. That little girl. She began to cry then. That night, as they sought and received from each other whatever comfort passion could give, she touched him and said, "It is true. I am a witch, and your partner. The great marriage." End of chapter 28. Recording by Angelique G. Campbell. Chapter 29 of The Blue Star. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Angelique G. Campbell. August 2018. The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT. No and yes. "You helped me so much before," said Lalette. The widow Angelique contemplated her tranquilly from among the husks of characters who never lived. "Yet you are again in need of help. The Mayonnaise, I could not. You could not give up the desires of this false material world for the God of love. However, it is not necessary to agree with everything that is done under the rule of the prophet. And when the matron and the diacondos tried to force you to an advancement for which you were not ready, they were also submitting to the rule of evil. It is asked only to take steps we are prepared for." "Yes," said Lalette. "I do not know whether I can help you. Let us examine circumstance. Are you still stricken by lack of money?" "I had not thought of it. Rodvard touches the fees of the court where he is a writer. Our needs are small." The widow's smile was approving. "That is an element of progress. But he receives these fees because he uses the witchery of the Blue Star, does he not?" "Yes." "Then that is an element contrary to progress and very dangerous." Lalette looked at the floor. "I know. Everything seems to be a danger. I am so afraid of Matron. He keeps those guards around Rodvard, but I think they are more like jailers. One thing you must not do is let fear enter your heart, for it will breed fearful things. Remember that all in this false material world is only the reflection of your thoughts. Have you any word from your mother?" "Yes. A man brought a note. She wants me to escape and join her at the court." "Do you wish to go?" "I would like to see her again." Lalette looked up to see Dame Angelique watching her attentively, though she remained very quiet, and under the pressure of that silent scrutiny the girl moved. "She is under Count Clutie's protection, and I told you about Demandé. He is very kind and gay, and I think he is in love with me, but—" "Go on." "He told Matron about the little girl, the heiress. He was also trying to do the best for you, in his own way. Do you want to go, or would you rather stay with Rodvard?" In a small voice Lalette said, "I think I would rather stay with him. Is it wrong?" "Not if it is done in love and goodwill, rather than for any hope of gain. Have you asked him to take you away from the city?" "No, this Regency is so much to him." The widow stirred. "You will find help, child. Come to me again when he makes a plan." She stood up, but before the words of farewell could be pronounced, the door was flung open, and the boy Lalette burst in crying, "Mother, I was at the market and—" "Lalette, we have a guest." He looked embarrassed and made to Lalette the bow of a miniature courtier. "Oh, I remember you," he said. "You are the Princess Sunema. Only you are not cold any more. I am glad to see you." He turned again. "Mother, everybody at the market is excited. They say that there has been a battle in the Ragged Mountains, and Prince Pavunius has beaten the Tartulicans, and taken 3 of their generals, and the rest of them are all running away." Part 2. She had gone quietly to sleep. Rodvard had to rouse her with a finger touch behind the right ear that wakens without shock. Even then, she tried for a moment to draw him close until he whispered, "We must hurry." Beyond the window there was only cold wintry starshine, and little enough of that. But Rodvard had hoped for rain or snow. Lalette gathered her smallest of bundles. He led along the balcony, 3 windows down to where the trellis was, and stepped off backward into night, resting a moment on each step before taking the next. Lalette's dress almost made her stumble on the last step. She sank into his arms with a little gasp at the bottom. They had carefully worked out the matter of getting over the garden wall, from the barrel to the shed roof to the wall itself. It was too late for the bracket torch on the back street to have remained alight. As soon as she was down, they dodged, shivering past the plane trees, across, around a corner, and into the appointed alley. Something jingled. The man said, "Are you the travelers?" "Damned Namajiacs travelers," said Rodvard, as agreed, and "here is your horse and your let pass." Rodvard got up first. The man, whose features remained indistinguishable, helped Lalette up behind and gave them a farewell in tones not unfriendly. Rodvard had seldom followed the maze of streets toward the northwest quarter, but it was fairly easy to maintain direction, and there was only one gate leading to the Archer's high road. The horse walked, and Lalette felt so sleepy that it was almost agony to keep her place. There was no one moving on any street, and hardly a light at any window. Once a wrong turn led into a blind alley, but that did not hold them back long, and now they were in the shadow of the gate, with a sentry barring the path with a pike, and another holding up a lantern. "This is a fine hour to be leaving the city," grumbled the first. "All hours are fine when one must go," said Rodvard, and produced his paper. This was the moment of test. The sentry puzzled over it a moment, looked back at them, to the paper again, and said, "Pass, friends." As he turned back to the sentry cachet with his pike-bearing companion, Rodvard caught a fragment of words. "Won't be too glad to see that couple," and wondered what the paper had said. As they reached the far end of the bridge, where the ancient stone leopard stands, he urged his mount to trot, but the pace was too fast for Lalette. She had to beg him not to. They moved for a long time through a space without figures until, like a conjurer's trick, trees and houses began to appear in gray outline around them, and then slowly to take on color. The road turned leftward, and the river was beyond, with ice on it. Lalette said, "Rodvard." He did not turn his head. "What will you have?" "Can you forgive me?" "For what?" "Taking you away from everything. Your new day, the work." "There is nothing to forgive. I had to go." They were silent again, and in that silence the sun grew behind streaked clouds. Lalette was so tired and sore that she thought she must say something about it, but just before endurance reached its limit, they came to the famous bridge of boats at Gogau, with its inn on the opposite bank, and Rodvard said, "Let us rest here and take refreshment." He helped her down and inside to a seat, still without words, and a round-cheeked innkeeper came to them with a good morning. After he had gone, Rodvard said, "No, I do not know quite what I wished, or what I wish now, but I am sure it is not to be compelled to use all I have in Mathrin's way." He stared across the room away from her, and she, grateful that he was not looking to read her thought with the blue star, said, "Do you think he can make his regency stand?" "I do not know, but I think not in the long run. If Prince Pavinius has beaten the Tritolicans so badly," he touched the jacket where the cold stone lay, "this is not me, and I'll not be ruled by it, no more than you by your gift of witchery." She shuddered slightly. "It is a gift I never wished." Now his face showed trouble. He stood up and paced the floor, then turned to the inn portal, where after a moment she joined him, looking out. The sun had daunted down the clouds, picking everything out in winter's white gold. Beneath them the river hurried past, carrying little pieces of ice against the black boats. At last he said, "Somewhere I have lost the line. I suppose that the most we can do is try to use the lesser evil to overcome the greater, forgiving what we can. It is I who ask you to forgive me." She put an arm around his waist. "You do not need to. I think I love you." For an enchanted moment they stood so. Then Rodvard's hands went to his neck, and with a swift motion, he drew out the blue star over his head, and holding it in his hand, glanced at the stream, and then at Lalette. "Yes," she said. "It made only a small splash where it struck the water." End of chapter 29. Recording by Angelique G. Campbell. August 2018.
Epilogue of The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Blue Star. Epilogue. In view of the speed with which the low-hung clouds were driving past the window, there would evidently be no business with ducks that day. Hodge helped himself to more coffee. "I wonder what happened to them afterward," he said. "Does it matter?" said Penfield. "When an emotional problem is solved, the others become unreal." "You don't consider poverty a real problem?" asked McCall. "Only in a social and relative sense. Go look at the natives in the hill country of any Latin American state. They live on rice, beans, and 15 cents a day, and remain quite happy." Hodge said, "I agree that poverty is a minor matter in this particular case, but it seems to me that you're assuming too much when you speak of the emotional problem of that couple as solved. It's not like a sum in arithmetic, with a simple answer in definite figures. There are all sorts of sub- and side problems involved, to which no definite values can be assigned. For instance, isn't the memory of the girl, Lise, together with one of Lalette's outbursts of temper, going to produce an explosive mixture at some point? And aren't they keeping a good deal from each other?" Penfield's long face was thoughtful. "There are secrets in the background of every union," he said. "Even secrets as black as the murder by witchcraft, and as inexplicable as the failure and recovery of the Blue Star. But it seems to me that they are like the disagreements of parties in a politically stable state. Once the essential agreement to the abide has been reached, any difficulties can be resolved or compromised. Another thing, these people have a capacity for, well, close attunement to each other. More of it than we have. What puzzles me," he took a pull at his cigarette, "is a certain preoccupation with sex." McCall laughed. "Since it was the product of all three of us, that probably came out of Hodge's mind somehow. Persons of your age and mine," Hodge said. "I don't know where it came from, but I think I can explain it. It goes with religion, which is so often an outgrowth of sex, or a substitute for it." "What really interests me," said McCall, "is what happened in a political sense." "Well, the short-range developments seem fairly obvious," said Penfield, "and long-range ones are always unpredictable." "I wonder if it really exists," said Hodge, as Penfield had the night before. Penfield got up, went to the window, and looked out at the scudding clouds. "I wonder if we do," he said. The end of The Blue Star by Fletcher PRATT.